Hello everybody, and thank you for visiting this material. My name is Jeanette Fonseca and I work at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso. I'm a teacher of English there, teacher trainer, and right now I'm the head of the program. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this project, and as you can see here, the main topic is listening comprehension. And we've got a question for that. What does listening entail? Okay, I know that there are lots of questions and there are lots of apprehensions about listening and developing listening skills in the classroom. So I'm going to cover some of these topics and hopefully give you some ideas, okay, in terms of things that we can do there. Okay, this is what I'm going to be covering in this session. First, one question. Do we talk about listening comprehension or do we talk about listening complication? Because that's the word that most students use because that's the way they feel. It is way too difficult sometimes. Then we're going to be looking at models of listening process, and probably you're already familiar with top-down and bottom-up. So we're going to be discussing a little bit about that. Then we're going to be looking at a pedagogical model for second language listening, which is one of the few new elements that I'm going to incorporate in the presentation. Then we're going to do a hands-on activity. I'm going to suggest, okay, a procedure for listening comprehension, and then the summary or the discussion of the presentation. Okay, let's get started then. Now, what makes listening difficult? Okay, every time sometimes when we do listening activities, we feel, because of the students' answers, that there are lots of problems. And probably if I give you a few minutes now, you will be able to sort of recall some of the answers that probably you felt as a student yourselves. And some of these answers are, they speak too fast. That's the main complaint. They always speak too fast. They cannot stop the recording and they lose track very easily. Another reason, it could be the names of places, the names of people. Sometimes our students have a hard time trying to figure out the decoding process, and then they have lots of names and the names of cities, and it's kind of difficult for them to sort of discriminate what is important and what is not perhaps important. Another reason is background knowledge, or in general, the lack of background knowledge. If we're listening to a piece of news, for example, and if we don't have that information in our heads, if we don't know anything about the piece of news, then our approach to the material is going to be difficult, okay? So that's another element, that's another variable that we need to bear in mind. And another word that has become into use over the last few years, and this is this awareness of genre. My French is not that good, so you will probably pronounce it better than I do. But anyway, the concept of genre, the concept of how texts are organized and how we can anticipate the content and the organization based on what we know about a given genre, which is broader in a sense that the word context or discourse in a way. Okay, very quickly, because I'm sure that you're already familiar with this, but we need to also think about the spoken language, the features of the spoken language, which are of course different from the written language, okay? And we need to discuss some of these elements and see how they play a role in the listening materials that we select for our students, or the listening material that has been selected already in course books. And we need to bear this in mind because they will probably pose another load, another problem, okay, when we do this in the classroom. But again, it could be a problem or it could be a kind of support if we know what it is about and if we know how to deal with it. Okay, when we speak, we don't really speak in sentences, although like in this case, it's like, you know, reading something, so I speak with sentences. But as you may have noticed, I also have false starts, I make mistakes, and I rephrase what I have said, I hesitate. That's okay when you are speaking. And when we speak, we don't really speak in sentences, as I said earlier, but in clusters. We give stress to different parts of the sentences. So it's not a sort of plain stress, okay? So that's one thing. So we don't really hear people saying, where do you live? But where do you live? Where we have ellipses and where we also have these tone groups. Redundancy. Like in this case, because I'm not really interacting with you, I'm trying to refer to all the elements in a very explicit way. But if we were talking, then I would be using a lot of reference where you will be able to draw from context. So instead of saying listening is or listening is, then I would just say it is. But because I'm not interacting with you, I have to use the concept again and again. But in spoken language, in a real interaction, you won't need that. So then we have this redundancy. Then we say, okay, what is he talking about? What is this he or what is this it here? Reduced forms. And again, like the example I gave you earlier, we don't say, where do you live? We say, where to live, where to you. So this to you is an example of reduced forms. And they become a problem for our students, okay? Because they say, well, I never heard the do, okay? And when we teach them, do you, does he, etc. But when we actually listen to recorded material or when we listen to native speakers, we don't really hear it, although it is there. Then we have performance variables, like what I was telling you, like false starts, hesitations, we make mistakes and we go back, etc., etc. We also may have another problem, which is colloquial language. In general, when we use course books materials, we don't have this problem because everything has been edited. But when our students listen to songs, for example, or when they listen to authentic material, then they have another problem there, basically because it's not the type of language that they usually encounter in the classroom. Another problem, as I said earlier, rate of delivery. In other words, they always speak too fast, okay? But again, it depends on the material we're using. If we're using authentic materials, then of course the rate of delivery will be too fast for our learners. But if they are only exposed to pre-recorded material, pedagogical material, then they are not really exposed to real language. So the question for you here is to decide when to use which, okay? It will depend on the level of the students, it will depend on what you want them to achieve, and it's actually part of a process, how you go from sort of these finely tuned inputs to the roughly tuned inputs. And again, perhaps one of the last ones in this list, but not necessarily the last one overall, because you may have another set of elements that may interfere with comprehension in terms of what the spoken language is the concept of uncertainties. It's the things that we don't know. And Douglas Brown, in his book, in the book published in 2001, outlines some of these uncertainties, okay? Of course, the phonological knowledge, we may have a problem there, and it has to do with phonemes, with stress, with the tone groups, assimilation, elision, the very few and the same examples that I gave you earlier, okay? So if our students do not understand those features of the phonetical part of the language, then they are